Have you ever found yourself wondering why your wife may seem distant or uninterested in certain aspects of intimacy? Does it leave you feeling confused, maybe even rejected? Intimacy is often portrayed as simple, but for many couples, it's anything but. Today, we'll explore a deeply personal question that can arise in long-term relationships. What does it mean when your wife refuses to engage in certain intimate acts, such as anal sex? It's a topic most shy away from discussing, yet it holds the key to understanding the emotional and psychological layers in your relationship. But here's the twist: you may be focusing on the wrong question altogether. Stick around and we'll uncover a perspective that could transform not only your understanding of intimacy but your entire relationship dynamic. So let's break this down. Why would your wife reject something so personal, even if you believe it could bring you closer? Before jumping to conclusions, we need to pause and take a step back. What if it's not about a lack of love, desire, or attraction? What if the reasons are far more complex and rooted in emotional experiences, personal boundaries, or even past trauma? In long-term relationships, intimacy evolves, sometimes in ways we don't expect. What felt natural or exciting in earlier years may change as time goes on. It's not just physical, it's deeply tied to emotional connection, trust, and respect. One common mistake many make is assuming that reluctance equals rejection. But here's something to consider. Your wife's hesitation may be less about you and more about her story. Let me share a story with you, an example many might relate to. John and Mary had been married for 30 years. They had always been close, both emotionally and physically. But as they grew older, John noticed a change. Mary seemed less enthusiastic about certain intimate moments, particularly those involving new or less familiar experiences. At first, John took it personally. He felt rejected and even began questioning if Mary was still attracted to him. One evening, after an emotional conversation, Mary revealed something John had never known. Years before they met, she had experienced a deeply uncomfortable situation involving a past relationship. It wasn't something she liked to talk about, but it left a lasting mark on her perception of intimacy. Suddenly, everything clicked for John, not in a way that solved everything instantly, but in a way that deepened his empathy and understanding. And that's the key. Every action or reaction is part of a larger story. For many women, reluctance to engage in certain practices isn't about being closed-minded or uninterested. It could stem from physical discomfort, cultural or religious beliefs, or emotional vulnerability. Psychological studies have shown that anxiety or past negative experiences can create strong, almost instinctive boundaries. Imagine carrying the weight of that and being afraid to express it for fear of being judged or misunderstood. And then there's the cultural piece. In many households, topics like anal sex are viewed as taboo, something never openly discussed, and in some cases, even labeled as immoral or shameful. A woman raised in that environment might carry those beliefs into adulthood, shaping her comfort and openness in ways she might not even fully understand herself. Now, let me ask you something. How do you respond when your partner expresses discomfort? Do you push for explanations, try to convince her otherwise, or simply let it pass without really addressing the root cause? This is where so many couples get stuck. The silence creates distance, and before long, both partners feel misunderstood and disconnected. But here's a thought, a twist in how we approach this conversation. Instead of viewing her reluctance as a rejection, what if you saw it as an invitation to build deeper trust and intimacy in other ways? What if this was a chance to redefine how you connect emotionally and physically, without the pressure of meeting a certain expectation? Intimacy isn't about ticking boxes on a checklist. It's about finding what feels right for both of you, together. Think about the moments that made you feel closest to your partner. Was it a specific act, or was it the laughter you shared during a quiet evening, the comforting touch of a hand on your shoulder, or the deep conversations late at night? In moments of resistance, we often focus too much on what's being denied, rather than seeing the opportunity to explore other ways of connecting. When approached with kindness and curiosity, these conversations can open doors you never knew existed. It's not about giving up, it's about growing together. Stay with me. Next, we'll talk about practical ways to foster honest, heartfelt communication and how this shift in perspective can breathe new life into your relationship. Let's talk about emotional intimacy, the often overlooked cornerstone of every strong relationship. Many believe physical intimacy is the ultimate marker of a healthy marriage, but here's the surprising truth. It's emotional intimacy that forms the bedrock. Without it, even the most passionate physical connection will eventually feel empty. When emotional safety is missing, physical touch becomes transactional, and it's only a matter of time before resentment takes root. Picture this. You're sitting in the same room with your partner. The TV is on, the evening is quiet, but something feels off. No conversation, no warmth, just two people coexisting. That quiet distance is a louder warning sign than any argument ever could be. And when left unaddressed, it builds an invisible wall between you. This exact situation happened to a couple I once knew, Tom and Linda. Married for 25 years, they had a life most people would envy. They rarely fought, enjoyed occasional date nights, and their home was filled with family photos and laughter. But behind closed doors, their intimacy was quietly slipping away. At first, Tom assumed the problem was purely physical. He blamed the changes on age, thinking maybe Linda just wasn't as interested as she used to be. But here's the twist. Her disinterest had nothing to do with physical attraction or hormones. One evening, after weeks of frustration, Tom asked her something simple yet profound. "What do you need from me that I haven't been giving?" Linda's response caught him off guard. It wasn't about passion, it was about connection. She shared that she often felt invisible in their everyday interactions. Over the years, their conversations had become practical, focused on schedules, bills, and logistics, while the deeper emotional connection quietly disappeared. Linda no longer felt emotionally safe or understood, which made physical closeness feel like a duty rather than a shared experience of love. Here's the hard truth. When emotional needs go unmet, physical intimacy becomes strained, and no amount of effort in the bedroom can fix that. What Tom learned, and what we can all take away, is that emotional intimacy is not a bonus, it's a necessity. Rebuilding that connection takes time, and it starts with a willingness to listen deeply. This kind of listening isn't about finding a quick solution, but about being genuinely curious. When you ask your partner how they're feeling, don't settle for the easy answers. Go deeper. Replace the usual, "How was your day?" with something more meaningful like, "What's been on your mind lately?" or "What's one thing that's brought you joy this week?" Being emotionally present is just as important. In a world filled with constant distractions, it's easy to become consumed by work, phones, and endless to-do lists. Make an intentional effort to slow down and truly engage with your partner. Even 10 minutes of undivided attention can begin to rebuild the bridge that time and silence may have weakened. And when your partner opens up, don't rush to fix things. Sometimes the most powerful response is simply acknowledging their feelings, offering them the space to feel heard without judgment. These small but consistent moments create the foundation for trust and connection. And here's where the magic happens. As emotional intimacy grows, physical closeness becomes effortless. It's no longer something to plan or negotiate. It becomes an organic part of your shared experience. But what if rebuilding this connection still doesn't resolve the deeper issue? What if, despite your best efforts, your wife remains hesitant about certain forms of intimacy? Does that mean the problem is unsolvable, or could there be something even more deeply rooted at play? Stay with me, because what we'll explore next may challenge your assumptions and offer a new perspective that could transform your relationship forever. Here's a perspective that might challenge the way you've been thinking about intimacy. Boundaries aren't barriers. They're invitations to deeper trust. When your partner expresses a boundary, whether it's a reluctance to engage in a certain act or a firm refusal, it's not a rejection of you. It's a window into her emotional world. Respecting that boundary might be the most powerful expression of love and maturity you can offer. Imagine this. You and your partner are walking a path together. Every time she sets a boundary, it's like she's pointing out where the ground is uneven. You can choose to ignore it, risking a stumble, or you can adjust your step and learn to navigate that terrain with her. Boundaries aren't meant to push you apart. They're the guideposts that show you how to walk alongside each other more closely. But here's where it gets complicated and potentially controversial. Some might ask, if my partner truly loves and trusts me, shouldn't she be willing to explore outside her comfort zone for the sake of our relationship? It's a tempting line of thinking, and it's led many couples into dangerous emotional territory. Let me share another story. David and Susan had been married for 18 years. They were deeply in love but struggled with differing expectations around physical intimacy. David believed that pushing boundaries would help them grow together. Susan, on the other hand, felt pressured and increasingly withdrawn. David couldn't understand why his well-intentioned suggestions were met with resistance. Until one day, Susan broke down in tears. "I feel like you're trying to change me," she said. "Every time you bring this up, it makes me feel like I'm not enough as I am." David had never considered it from that angle. His goal was never to hurt Susan, but the constant pressure, no matter how gentle, left her feeling judged and inadequate. And here's the kicker. Even small, repeated conversations about boundaries can feel like emotional erosion. Over time, they wear down trust, creating cracks in the foundation of the relationship. It's in these vulnerable moments that couples have two choices: push harder and risk creating permanent distance, or lean into understanding and empathy. David chose the latter, and it transformed everything. He stopped seeing boundaries as walls to break through and started treating them as opportunities to learn more about Susan's inner world. Here's a thought that might surprise you. Sometimes the deepest intimacy is found not in crossing boundaries, but in honoring them. There's something profoundly intimate about saying, "I see you, I hear you, and I respect your no." Many couples get caught in the trap of believing that a successful relationship means doing everything together, exploring every desire without hesitation. But that's a myth. The healthiest relationships are built on a balance of shared experiences and mutual respect for each other's individual limits. It's about finding your shared comfort zone while honoring the unique needs that make you who you are. And let's not forget the physical side of boundaries. There are real, biological reasons why certain forms of intimacy might be uncomfortable or even painful for some women. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. A woman who has experienced trauma, whether physical, emotional, or sexual, may carry that memory in her body, even if her mind has long since moved on. For others, physical factors like hormonal changes, past surgeries, or chronic pain conditions can create discomfort that's hard to talk about. This is why communication is critical. Not just talking, but listening deeply, without judgment, without trying to fix. Sometimes the most healing thing you can do for your partner is to simply hold space for her to speak her truth. Now you might be thinking, but what about my needs? Don't they matter too? Absolutely. In a healthy relationship, your needs should never be ignored. But the key is finding new ways to meet those needs without crossing into emotional coercion. It's about expanding your definition of intimacy, seeing it not as a single act but as a spectrum of experiences that bring you closer. David and Susan found this out through trial and error. When they stopped focusing on what wasn't happening in their bedroom and started exploring other forms of connection. Deep conversations, shared hobbies, spontaneous moments of affection. They discovered something surprising. The pressure lifted. And as it did, their physical connection became more natural and joyful than it had been in years. Boundaries, when respected, can become a source of strength rather than a limitation. They create a sense of safety, and when your partner feels safe, she becomes more open, not just emotionally but physically as well. So, here's a challenge for you. What if you stopped seeing boundaries as obstacles and started treating them as opportunities? Opportunities to listen more, to understand better, and to love more deeply. What might change if, instead of pushing, you leaned into that vulnerability and said, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Let's figure this out together." And if that sounds like the harder path, it's because it is. But trust me, the reward is worth it. In honoring those boundaries, you may just discover a level of intimacy you never thought possible. But we're not done yet. What happens when boundaries become a source of conflict? Despite your best efforts? What if these differences start feeling like irreconcilable gaps? Should you compromise, adapt, or seek outside help? Stay with me. We're about to take a deeper dive into the art of negotiation, compromise, and finding new pathways to connection. Here's where things can get tricky. What do you do when differences in desires feel like a growing gap rather than an opportunity for connection? You've listened, you've respected boundaries, and yet something still feels unresolved. Do you compromise? Do you adapt? Or is this where you start to wonder if those differences are just too big to bridge? Let me tell you something important. Conflict around intimacy doesn't mean the relationship is broken. It means you're human. Every couple will, at some point, face mismatched desires, different comfort levels, or evolving needs. The real question isn't how to avoid these moments, but how to navigate them without losing the emotional bond that holds you together. Here's another twist you might not expect. Compromise doesn't always mean meeting in the middle. Sometimes compromise means taking turns. Sometimes it means letting go of something you once thought was essential in favor of something even more fulfilling. And sometimes it means creating an entirely new definition of what intimacy looks like for your relationship. Take the case of Mark and Diane. After 15 years of marriage, they hit a wall when it came to physical intimacy. Mark had certain desires that Diane wasn't comfortable with, and for a while, this became a source of quiet tension. They avoided the conversation, hoping it would resolve itself. It didn't. The distance only grew, and soon their lack of physical connection began spilling into other parts of their relationship, affecting their communication, their emotional closeness, and even their sense of partnership. One day, Diane suggested something. Well, what if we stopped focusing on what's not working and started finding new ways to connect? Mark wasn't sure what she meant at first, but Diane explained that she wanted to explore different types of intimacy, not just physical, but emotional, intellectual, and even spiritual. This wasn't an easy transition for Mark. He was hesitant at first, worried it was just a way of avoiding the real problem. But as they leaned into this new approach, something unexpected happened. They began to feel closer than they had in years. Long walks turned into deep conversations. Shared hobbies reignited their sense of fun and partnership. And slowly, the physical intimacy returned, not in the way Mark had originally envisioned, but in a way that felt more authentic and deeply connected. Sometimes, the best solution isn't to push for a compromise in the moment, it's to zoom out and redefine what intimacy means for your relationship. Maybe it's not about one specific act, but about creating a shared space where you can both feel safe, seen, and loved. But what happens when even these efforts don't bring the clarity or resolution you were hoping for? Should you seek outside help? Absolutely. There's no shame in bringing in a third party, like a couples therapist or a sex therapist, to help you navigate these tricky waters. In fact, some of the most successful couples are the ones who recognize when they need a little extra guidance. Therapists can provide a fresh perspective, offer new tools for communication, and help both partners feel heard in ways that might not be possible in everyday conversation. Remember, seeking help isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of deep commitment to your relationship. Now, let's address something you might be wondering. Is it possible to stay happy and connected, even when certain desires remain unfulfilled? Here's the answer: absolutely, but it requires a shift in mindset. It means focusing on what you do have rather than what's missing. It means embracing the idea that no relationship will meet every need, but the best ones are the ones where both partners work together to create something that feels right for them. Mark and Diane are a perfect example. Did they solve every issue? No. Did they find a way to completely align their desires? Not always. But they found something better. A way to respect each other's boundaries, build new forms of intimacy, and create a relationship that felt stronger and more resilient than ever before. So, here's my challenge to you. What new pathways could you explore in your relationship? Could you try shifting the focus from what's lacking to what's possible? Could you find joy in rediscovering each other, not just as lovers, but as partners, friends, and companions on this journey of life? And if you ever feel like you're running out of ideas, remember that it's okay to reach out for help. Sometimes just having someone to listen can change everything. In the end, the true essence of intimacy isn't about perfection or fulfilling every desire. It's about connection, respect, and the willingness to keep showing up for each other, even when things get complicated. But before we wrap up, there's one more crucial thing we need to talk about. How do you protect your relationship from misunderstandings and resentment when differences arise? This might be the most important part yet, because it's not just about solving problems, it's about building resilience for the future. Stay with me. You won't want to miss this. Now that we've gone on this journey together, exploring emotional intimacy, boundaries, and the delicate dance of compromise, you might be wondering, what's next? How do I take all of this and apply it to my own relationship? The truth is, understanding these concepts is only the first step. The real magic happens when you start putting them into practice. But before we talk about practical steps, I want to leave you with a twist, a perspective that might change the way you see your relationship forever. What if differences in intimacy aren't something to fix, but something to celebrate? It sounds strange at first, doesn't it? We're so conditioned to think that harmony means being perfectly aligned on every level, emotionally, physically, even spiritually. But that's not what real love looks like. Real love isn't perfect. It's raw. It's complicated. It's about two imperfect people, choosing each other every day even when it's hard. Let me take you back to one of the couples I mentioned earlier, David and Susan. After months of therapy and honest conversations, they reached an important realization. They didn't need to be in complete agreement about every desire to have a fulfilling relationship. Instead, they learned to honor their differences and create new traditions that worked for them. For David, it was about letting go of the need to convince Susan to change her boundaries. For Susan, it was about finding ways to express love that felt safe and meaningful. And for both of them, it was about redefining success in their relationship. So, how can you do the same? It starts with creating space for honest conversations. Not once or twice, but regularly. Sit down with your partner, not to solve problems, but to simply ask, "How are we doing? What do you need from me right now?" These check-ins will become the foundation of your emotional connection. It also means getting comfortable with discomfort. Some of the most powerful growth moments in a relationship come from leaning into the hard conversations, the ones that make you squirm a little. The key is to approach them with love, curiosity, and patience. And here's something that's often overlooked: celebrate the wins. Too many couples focus only on what's missing or what needs to improve. But every step forward, no matter how small, is worth celebrating. Maybe it's a conversation that felt more open than usual. Maybe it's a new way you found to connect emotionally. Maybe it's simply noticing your partner's effort and saying, "Thank you for that." Over time, these small moments add up to something big. A relationship that feels grounded, resilient, and full of possibility. But there's one final question we need to answer. What happens when you've tried everything and still feel stuck? Here's the answer: it's okay to ask for help. There's no shame in seeking outside support from a counselor, therapist, or even trusted friends who've walked this path before you. Sometimes, an outside perspective is exactly what's needed to unlock the next chapter of your relationship. And if you ever feel lost, remember this: love isn't a destination. It's a constant journey of learning, growing, and rediscovering each other. In the end, the greatest gift you can give your partner is your willingness to keep showing up. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, but with an open heart and a commitment to keep building something beautiful together. If you've stayed with me this far, I want to thank you. It means you care deeply about your relationship and are willing to do the hard work it takes to grow. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one insight from this conversation that you'll take into your relationship? Share it in the comments below. Your story could inspire someone else who's on a similar journey. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We've got more conversations like this coming your way, and I wouldn't want you to miss them. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other. Relationships aren't always easy, but with love, empathy, and a willingness to listen, they can be the most rewarding journey of all.